Welcome to Technical, a bi-coastal podcast where Silicon Alley meets Silicon Valley. This is a podcast for technology professionals, so we go pretty deep. I'm Bill Kozel of TechWriters NYC. At TechWriters NYC, we translate geek speak. Visit us at techwriters.nyc. My guest this week is Oliver Mitchell. Oliver is the founding partner of Autonomy Ventures, a New York-based venture capital firm focused on seed-stage investments in robotics, autonomous mobility, and artificial intelligence. He spent the last 20 years building and selling ventures, including Homes Protection to ADT Tyco, Americash to American Express, and launching Robot Galaxy, a national edtech brand. Oliver has been investing in the robotics industry for 10 years, with 6 successful exits in his angel portfolio in the past 2 years, including 2 IPOs. He is a member of the New York Angels and co-chairs the Frontier Tech Committee. His Twitter handle is The Robot Rabbi. He is a sought-after speaker and syndicated writer and has appeared on a number of TV shows, including The Big Idea with Donnie Deutsch and Rachel Ray. I need to ask you about that, Oliver. And if that wasn't enough, he holds 14 patents. I've seen him at various meetings in New York, and he speaks with uncommon eloquence. Welcome to Technical, Oliver.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope I can live up to the uncommon eloquence. Excuse me.
So first, tell us about your background, where you grew up, where you went to school.
Sure. I grew up here in New York City. I am a child of Holocaust survivors and went to school here on the East Coast. And then when it was time to go to college, I went out west to Arizona State. Arizona State has been leading the discoveries on a number of geologic platforms with the Mars rover, which is very exciting for my alma mater. And I started my career in advertising and went into M&A and doing startups, as you mentioned. And for the past 10 years, I've been a professional angel investor and venture capitalist.
So we have advertising in common.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Where did you start?
I started in Kirschbaum and Bond, launching brands like Snapple, Moschidar, and Hennessy, home insurance.
Wow. Great. Okay, so let's talk robotics. We've come a long way from robots doing spot welding. So what are the most exciting applications for robotics today?
Sure. Let me just take a step back because you really bring up a great point. When you think about robotics, it's a really good time to really think how far we've come. And so robots really became very popular in the industrial sense, starting in the 1980s in Detroit, in mechanizing entire plants. And if you visit those plants today, they are without lights, they're without windows, and without people. And what has really happened in the last 5 years is you're seeing those walls that would be around these big industrial robots that were big and yellow and massive in scale that could kill a human being with one thrust come down. And robots now, through sensor-based technologies, can work collaboratively next to a human. So we're seeing a lot of what's called cobots that are working side by side with human workers. So they're doing pick and place in manufacturing, pick and pack in warehousing and e-commerce. They're working in agriculture and sorting, the good tomatoes from the rotten tomatoes. And so we're seeing today, because of sensor-based technologies and the speed of processing power, the opportunities of robotics that we've never seen in the past decade moving at a rapid speed. And so I've been investing for over 10 years, and people used to look at me like I was crazy. Like, aren't those big robots that are in Detroit building cars? And I was like, yes. But there are also really small robots as well, and they're powering medical devices, and they're going to be powering our next generation of automobiles. And we're seeing today, in 1 year, the progress of 10 years.
Wow. You specialize in robots that do some of the dirty jobs of the world. What made you focus on that?
So it's really the low-hanging fruit of robotics is dull, dirty, and dangerous. So a job that is monotonous and tedious that a human being will do over and over again, and probably the more they do it, the less quality you'll get out of it. When I used to be in the toy business, I used to visit my factories, and there'd be a testing room where people would do a drop test from 6 feet and 4 feet, and all day long they're dropping toys. I mean, you could not think of a duller job, and that's probably pretty perfect for a robot to do. Dirty, if you think about working in an oil rig or working in a nuclear power plant, clearly these are jobs that could be potentially too dangerous for a human being doing long term, and maybe they can only do it for like 5-10 years of their life, and they could have catastrophic injuries after that. And so that's really another aspect of robotics, and of course dangerous also plays into that. We've been building robots in Mars for over 30 years, and it's just too dangerous right now to send a human being to and back from Mars. And so that's a great example of where robots fit that gap. And so you don't have to look to Mars. Right here terrestrially, you can look on Earth. There's lots of opportunities for robots to work both side by side with humans, and also to enable human beings to move away from dull and dirty and dangerous jobs and move up the scale to much more creative tasks.
Okay, so the Internet of Things is known for having zillions of proprietary standards. Is it the same with robotics?
I think the Internet of Things, when we think about, the consumer Internet of Things, IoT, that you have different consumer product companies that are competing for market share. And so the more that they can have a walled garden and protect their market share by not having upstarts take away market share, they're going to enforce that with different standards. I think in the industrial world and in robotics, you have a different brain trust of innovators. And so, for example, a big catalyst for innovation within modern robotics was Willow Garage in Silicon Valley. And they developed an open source robot operating system, ROS. And so you have a open source environment where people are sharing technologies on the software side that is enabling, innovation to happen at a rapid speed, and also bring down the cost of innovation. And so there's so many companies that have been spun out of Willow Garage, Simbi Robotics, not Fellow, Melanie Wise's company, Fetch Robotics. And then here on the East Coast at MIT, Rodney Brooks is he's really the godfather of robotics. And he helped found iRobot and now Rethink Robotics. And so you have different brain trusts that are moving forward the industry in a much more, I think, more responsible and less commercial way. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of commercial activity in robotics. But as far as the discussion and the open forum of sharing technologies, there's a lot more collaboration going on.
So they can work together with each other and then?
Yeah, I think that, it takes a lot of human beings to build a robot. And so there's a lot of specialties involved. I mean, you got mechanical engineering, you got electrical engineering, you got computer scientists, you got neural, network data scientists. And so the more that you can bring down that head count and really enable people to, focus on what they need to do to execute, the better the technologies will be. There will be, clearly the big companies like KUKA and ABB and GE, maybe they won't be compatible where you can work them together, but there's a lot of people working on that middle layer to enable robots to collaborate with each other.
People are worried about robots costing jobs when they may in fact create more jobs, but different kinds of jobs. How do you address those concerns?
Well, I'm one of those people that worry about robots taking away jobs. I worry about it every waking moment. And one of the reasons why I started writing over 10 years ago was to discuss, the social impact of robotics on human beings. And then what I found is that at many of the conferences that I was going to, that you had technologists speaking to venture capitalists, and that really, in order for us to implement robotics in a very responsible way, we have to enable all the stakeholders to come together in a forum-based discussion. And so I created a quarterly event series called Robot Lab that focused on different aspects of the automation economy, and to bring together not just great technologists and not just venture capitalists, but also policymakers, academics, and labor. And so I think, it's really important that we involve everybody in that discussion first and foremost. According to the UN, 2/3 of the jobs in first world economies will disappear based upon automation. That is a scary statistic. Now, maybe the UN's wrong, but are they wrong by 100%? Are they wrong by 50%? That's still a big number. And so this is something that we really have to think about. Yes, there will be jobs created, but we cannot divorce ourselves from the friction that will be created. We're already seeing social upheaval in the political world, right, which led to elections in this country, elections in France, led to Brexit in England. And so people are left out of the discussion. We have to involve them in the discussion and loosen the friction there. So by doing that, we should look at every industry and see where we can have opportunities. I'll give you an example. So I give a keynote speech at many conferences where I go through every single industry, every single vertical, from manufacturing what you order on Amazon, to shipping it, to delivering it, to how energy is sourced and produced, to alternative energy, to construction, to mining, to food production, to waste facilities. And every aspect of it is being automated. But I end my keynote always with a weather report. I ended with a satellite map of the weather. And I say, if you were going to watch the evening news and you were going to see that it's going to rain tomorrow, most likely you're going to take an umbrella. And so I've just shown you technologies that are happening not in 5-10 years, but they're happening today. And they're going to impact our world over the next decades. And so what are we going to do about it? Everyone knows that about Otto being bought by Uber for $680 million. They're an autonomous trucking company. So what is the Teamster Union doing about that? What conversations is organized labor having with Uber about what's going to be the future of those 2 million jobs that it could potentially replace? And so we really have to think very openly, in a very mindful way, about the jobs that will be lost, the jobs that will be created. And finally, we have to think about our low-income communities, and that too much of technology is happening in different hubs of innovation, in very affluent communities, Silicon Valley, New York City, Cambridge, Massachusetts. But what is happening in the less affluent communities? How can we bring technology in there? And beyond just, STEM and whimsical toys that teach STEM, but why, I would love to see, innovation placed in those communities where we can be involving low-income communities earlier in the discussion. So when somebody chooses to go to college and they want to study computer programming, they don't study Java just because the professor learned Java, when he was working in the workforce, and then graduates with a degree and says, oh, I could program Java. And the guy says to him, well, we don't use that anymore. They could be part of the economy of the future. And so, job training starts at the earliest age, and the discussion, started yesterday.
You've been to CES many times. What was your favorite moment from this one?
I think, the Consumer Electronics Show is a misnomer. Everyone, in my industry, I focus on business and industrial automation, so I don't really focus on consumer. Looks to me like, why do you need to go to consumer electronics? And I say, well, it's not really about consumer electronics anymore. Yes, there is the amazing LG cavern of televisions, but I would say, about 2/3 of the show, especially this year, was about business to business and about B2B. And that, this year's tagline was WHOA, WHOA. And I really didn't have that wow moment where I saw something and I was like, wow, the future is going to be like George Jetson, going off, to work. I really felt that, rather than an epiphany, that I thought it was an affirmation of everything that we've been discussing for over the past few years. So, for example, clearly autonomous cars was a very big headline. And so every single car company, including Toyota, mind you, was talking about autonomous cars. Why did I say about Toyota? Because last year, Gil Pratt of Toyota Research, said, we're not interested in level 3 autopilot semi-autonomous cars. Well, they actually had one at the 2018 show, because there was a car that said self-driving car with a big sticker from Toyota on it, and it still had a steering wheel. So clearly that was not a fully autonomous car. That was a semi-autonomous car. So every single car company, even the ones that were skeptical years past, were definitely thinking, and their story was forward thinking. What was also interesting is on the periphery of the North Hall, where the auto companies are, where there are 3D printing companies. Now, everyone thinks about 3D printing as, things you could buy on Shapeways, but these were companies, manufacturing parts for cars, manufacturing specialized parts, metal parts. And I thought that was a really interesting moment for the additive manufacturing industry. It was a validation of coming of age almost, that they were integrated with the supply chain of the automobile industry. Then, there were a lot of social robots. If, years past, every other booth was a drone company, and then last year was every other booth was a VR headset. I don't know if it was every other booth, but maybe every 5 booths was a social robot. And they were, cute. They were monotonous. It was sort of a Disney nightmare at certain points. But I would say that it really does show that there is a coming of age. The idea of the movie Robot and Frank, where you have an elderly man being aided by a social robot that's cooking him dinner and teaching him how to garden. Well, maybe that won't happen in the near term, but you can definitely say, well, we're going to have 70 million people over the age of 65 in this country, and we're not going to have enough caregivers. Clearly, computers and robotics will be a big part of that, as shown by the Consumer Electronics Show. And then finally, which is really difficult for a trade show to exhibit, there was a lot of promoting of artificial intelligence. I wonder if next year they're going to promote, being involved in the blockchain, but, going from one buzzword to the next. But, even Intel, had a huge placard and a light show to exhibit what they mean by AI. And I think the idea is that we're no longer talking about sort of dumb computers that are getting content from a network like an MSO or from the cloud, that all the intelligence is held in a centralized location. But we're talking about smart devices around the home, smart devices around the car, smart devices around society. And I think that was a really interesting thing, is that, from the automobile to the social robots, to the integration of these technologies, that it was really a fruition of many themes that we've been discussing for so long.
We'll be back with more from Oliver Mitchell after a word from our sponsor, which is me. At TechWriters NYC, we get you, your product, your market, your strategy. And we make sure the rest of the world does too. Through clear, concise, creative messaging, our rockstar writers give you the power to differentiate yourself from the competition, just as we've done for the world's biggest tech companies and venture-funded startups. To quote one client, "As always, exactly what I needed in a tight timeline. Fantastic work." For a consultation, call 212-363-0403. That's 212-363-0403. Or email info@techwriters.nyc. And now let's return to our conversation with Oliver Mitchell. What's your most promising portfolio investment in robotics?
I try to invest with a portfolio approach, which means that I would not invest in 2 companies doing the same thing. I try to look at the entire industry and try to encompass as many facets of the industry with different enabling technologies. A great company that I'm an investor in, which is based down the valley, is Carbon Robotics. It does low-cost robotic arms for manufacturing, and really for mid to small manufacturing, working with automobile manufacturers and sort of washing the parts and cleaning the parts after they've been injected in molding. And it's a company that has a great founder, Rosanna, who's very promising, very eager, an incredible learner, an incredible team. And so they've been really exciting. And I have a number of exits, as you mentioned. But reflecting, on my portfolio, I would say they're all promising. They're all really exciting. However, the ones that impact the world in a very positive way, like, for example, a company that I exited from, they went public, called Exobionics, which developed the first exoskeleton for paraplegics, people with spinal cord injuries, and enabling them to walk again. I mean, there's nothing more impactful than we're sitting, a few feet from each other with somebody who's my contemporary, who through an injury became a paraplegic and now was able to walk again.
Wow.
And seeing that. So that to me is really exciting, how we can affect the world in a positive way using these technologies.
Tell me something about robotics that would surprise me.
I think that what is most surprising is that most people don't realize that they've been handing over the keys to robots for several decades, maybe even their lifetime. So every time you've gone on an airplane, most of the flight is flown by a robot.
Oh, yeah.
And our cars, in many ways, are robotically, driven in the sense that we're pressing the accelerator and the brake, but we're getting information from around us to tell us how to drive, how quickly we should brake, how we should park. And so I think the idea that we are living in a much more sensor-based planet would be the most surprising. That if you walked out, onto Broadway here, and you looked up, and you would see all these funny devices on the lampposts, and you'd be wondering, well, I know that is a traffic light, and I know that's the light, but what are these fin-tail things? Well, these are part of a mesh network that was built by the Bloomberg administration that enables high-speed Wi-Fi for all their industrial communication platform, and that's what many smart transportation networks already tap into. City buses, by example, if they're coming close to a red light and the red light's going to change to keep them on schedule, keep the light green just a few seconds longer. And so we're already using a number of the technologies that is being promoted. And I also think that that'd be surprising is the relevance of the technologies that we have in our lives. We're doing a podcast, right? It used to be that you do radio; you'd have to be on a frequency. The democratization of technology to bring it into the hands of people, so people can become, authors of their own creative activities. And so, I think in robotics that if you think about robotics, compared to the personal computing age, the biggest catalyst in the personal computing age was, the year 1995. Windows 95 came out that year, and so did Java. Write once, publish anywhere. And so we're a few years before that, Windows 95 moment, but not that far off. And so what happens when robotics and automation gets in the hands of everyday people who are not engineers, who think about it very differently to solve the problems that they need in their own lives? I think that will be the most surprising, most encouraging.
You've traveled extensively to Israel as chair of the UGA's tech division. What were the trips like?
Well, I'm traveling this Saturday night again.
Oh, yeah? Oh.
I'm leading a mission of 20 plus executives within venture capital, within the support system of the startup community, within aspiring entrepreneurs, and taking them to the cybersecurity show, CyberTech, and we're going to innovation hubs like GM's Innovation Center, and we're going to universities like Hebrew University and Tel Aviv University, looking at their robotics labs and their life science labs, and we're going to be meeting with great entrepreneurs and venture capitalists on the ground. It's going to be 4 intensive days, and as well as looking at some impact that what the UGA does. We'll be going to a restaurant that has no lights, so you can see what it's like being blind and eating in the dark. And it's to educate people about the blind and to create technologies for the blind. And so we're going to see also a lot of impact as well. And so Israel is an amazing ecosystem. It's a very small country that has a lot of ambitious talent. And the talent comes from, one, it's an immigrant society, just like my parents were immigrants. We live in an age where maybe the word immigrant is a bad word, at least among some people. To me, I find that immigrants work harder than natives do, and they're almost the ultimate entrepreneur. They have to reinvent themselves, reinvent their whole network and community. And so in Israel, you have so many different communities, from the former Soviet Union to Arab countries like Yemen and Syria to Sabras who grew up in Israel. And then number two is you have the Army, which is very different than the U.S. Army. It's the reverse. It's anti-hierarchical. So you have young people of 20 in charge of hundreds of people. You have different elite sort of software units that are very focused on next generation technologies. And so when people graduate the Army, they want to take those technologies that they are working with, which were cutting edge, and make it accessible to commercial businesses. And you also have a lot of people that are not scared to fail. And I think that too often, in this country is that, you go to the best schools, you go to Columbia, you go to Harvard, and then you'll get a graduate degree from another great school, and you'll go work at a large consulting firm, and you'll go through the ascension. And then you'll do your startup, and you'll encounter failure, and you'll encounter rejection. And there's this fear of failure is a bad thing. One of my favorite commencement speeches was by J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter, and she wrote it all. She wrote her speech, or said her speech to Harvard, basically saying, I failed in every respect to my life. I was in abject poverty. I was a single mother. I had a failed marriage. I was overwhelmed. I didn't have a job. And she started to write Harry Potter, and which became, as you know, an international success. So not being scaled a failure, and there will be times when hang-ups and bang-ups can happen to you, but moving forward from those and from those lessons learned is really important. So I think that all those things make Israel an amazing talent pool. And the cooperation with the U.S. And I don't want to, focus on Israel over the U.S. or other countries. I think, every area has their unique innovation that they're known for.
Have you been to other countries to sample their robotics?
Sure. In Switzerland, there's the ETH, university, which is an incredible resource. The founder of Kiva Systems is a professor there, Raffaele Andrea. He has Veridity, which is a drone company. That works for Kiva Systems is a smart warehousing solution that was bought in 2012 by Amazon for $775 million. I think that in the Nordic countries, you have a lot of great innovation. In Canada, you have a lot of great innovation. I see so many different, countries in Asia, whether in Korea and Japan and China, that are focused on sort of the next generation of robotic interfaces. And so I think that each area has their speciality. So whether that's in Boston or in Pittsburgh or in Silicon Valley. And so, when you travel out to Silicon Valley, that everyone thinks that outside SFO, we still use smoke signals to communicate. So there is innovation outside of San Francisco, and likewise, there's innovation outside the shores of the United States.
Yeah. How about in New York? What's happening here?
New York, there's a lot of great things happening here. One of the oldest robotic companies, Honeybee Robotics, was just recently sold. They've been involved in the Mars rover program since inception. Steve Gorvan is an incredible thinker. They're based in Brooklyn, in the new lab space, which is in the Brooklyn Navy Yards, which is an innovation hub for mechatronics. Very exciting. Columbia University, has a very active robotic, community and lab space. Peter Allen's work up there. Obviously, the opening of Cornell Tech on Roosevelt Island is very exciting. Even, City University and State University. I mean, the Nanotechnology Center up in Albany is amazing. I don't know if you've been up to Albany and to see the clean rooms of where they're doing the next generation of semiconductor research. It's like, I think it is the top research facility in the world for semiconductors.
Wow.
In Albany, New York. So I don't think you should be biased based upon that's at Harvard or MIT. I think you can look, in the basements of many engineering schools, and you could see some great innovators. But it's the ability to execute that separate people. And so many times you'll have great labs, but you really need to bring in some business leaders to help take that technology to the next level within a commercial community.
In my NVIDIA conversation with Ian Black, he mentioned Aurora Labs, which I think you're an investor in. What's their business model?
So Aurora Labs is an Israeli startup that does over-the-air software updates for connected and autonomous cars. So most of the very expensive billion-dollar recalls recently in the automobile sector have been in firmware defects. And typically, if you had a problem on your MacBook Air there, you would just download the newest operating system or download the patch. Well, a car traditionally was not built that way. They have an OBD2 connector that's underneath the steering wheel. And you got to drive into the dealership. You got to plug in that OBD2. And 5 minutes later, you have the update. Now, that doesn't sound too hard, but the car companies have to pay you for your time. They got to pay that mechanic for his time. And so, that $200 visit, right, over, a few million cars is pretty expensive. So why can't, automobiles be updated just like how a Tesla is updated or just like how your computer's updated? Well, they have to work with the ECUs, and the CAN bus, which is the processing unit of an automobile. And most would overwhelm it. What Aurora Labs does is it uses only 2% of the processing power to do these software updates. And they're right now in early stages. They're working with tier ones, which are the supply chain of the automobile industry, to prove out the model. And then they would be built into the next generation of cars, both for cars today, which I would call connected cars, and then cars tomorrow, which would be the autonomous cars.
Okay, so what did you do on Rachel Ray?
Well, I didn't do anything except I watched all my orders come in. So a little point of background, I founded a company called Robot Galaxy in 2006. We launched our stores in October 2007. And that Christmas season, we were the hottest new toy brand and retail brand and online brand. It was the first smart toy in the industry. The kids got to build the toys themselves. They got to download personalities. The robot said their name and nickname. And later on, when they would plug in the toy via USB, it would play games with them on a virtual world. And as they played games, they got new downloads to Robot. They went from cadet to commander, and their eye color changed. It said new things, had new vocabulary.
Wow.
They unlocked secrets within the virtual world. Rachel Ray featured this in her Christmas spectacular gift guide. And we were very fortunate. Within 3 minutes, I think we did $25,000 worth of sales, which is pretty good.
Wow.
Our robots were on a 7-minute segment, so we did very well post that. But only the robots were on Rachel Ray, not the founders.
Okay. How much do they cost?
The company was a victim of 2008 sort of world economic meltdown. And sort of on Maslow's pyramid of needs, robot toys fall pretty far on that list, which was a lesson learned. Go figure. I thought it was right after food and shelter. But and so the company's no longer around. When we were up and we were selling, at retail, they were basically around $40.
Wow, that's very cheap.
Well, if you want to build a product for mass consumption, you have to make it make sense for the pocketbook. And in fact, and post 2008, that was considered pretty expensive. The toys, from 2008 to 2012, the aisles in Walmart were 10 and under. So, and they also had a big tentpole movie around them. That, we were not part of the next Marvel characters.
Well, thank you, Oliver. My guest has been Oliver Mitchell, founding partner of Autonomy Ventures. You can learn more about Oliver at autonomyventures.com. That's it for this edition of Technical. Technical is a production of TechWriters NYC. A special thanks to Paul Rarest of Argo Studios. For Technical and TechWriters NYC, I'm Bill Kozel. See you next time.